A Karen at my gym reported me to management for making her uncomfortable by existing. I'm transgender. She demanded they revoke my membership. When they refused, she called the police. The responding officer was my former Army sergeant. He arrested her for filing a false report. She's suing me for $1 million. I'm not going to spend a lot of time defending myself up front because the facts should speak for themselves, but I also want to be clear that I've documented everything meticulously. I'm a transgender woman. I've been living as my authentic self for 3 years now, and I'm one of the most boring people at my gym. I go in, I work out for an hour, I shower, I leave. I don't talk to people. I don't take photos. I don't use the locker room in any way that would draw attention. I literally just exist in the space I paid for. My name is Rachel. I'm 34 years old, and I work as a civil engineer. I came out 3 years ago after spending the first 31 years of my life living as a man. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. My family has been supportive, my job has been supportive, and most people in my life have adjusted pretty well. I started going to City Fit Gym about 18 months ago, and it's been a great part of my mental health routine. I've never had a single issue there, never gotten complaints, never caused any problems. Then I met Karen. Actually, I didn't really meet her. I just knew she existed because she was always at the gym at the same time I was, always on the same elliptical machines, always seemed to be watching me. I figured she was one of those people who just watches everyone at the gym, which is weird, but harmless. I was very wrong. The first indication that something was off came on a Tuesday morning when I was leaving the gym. I was walking toward the door when I noticed the gym manager, Derek, waving me over. I immediately felt nervous because I couldn't think of anything I'd done wrong. When I got to the front desk, Derek looked uncomfortable, which made me more nervous. He explained that management had received a complaint about my behavior in the locker room. When I asked what behavior they were talking about, he seemed almost embarrassed. He said the complaint alleged that I made another member uncomfortable by using the women's locker room in an inappropriate way. Asked him to clarify what that meant. He said the member didn't specify, just that my presence there was making her uncomfortable. He assured me that he wasn't accusing me of anything and that he just wanted to hear my side of the story. He seemed like a genuinely good guy who was uncomfortable with the situation. I told him that I used the locker room like everyone else. I change into my workout clothes, I shower after, I change back into my regular clothes, and I leave. I don't hang out there, I don't talk to people, I don't do anything unusual. He nodded and said he believed me, but that management wanted to have a formal meeting to discuss the complaint. The meeting was scheduled for the following week. I mentioned it to my boyfriend Thomas that night, and he immediately got angry. He wanted me to hire a lawyer right then, said that this was discrimination, said I should sue the gym. I asked him to wait and see what the meeting was about first. He was skeptical but agreed. The meeting involved me, Derek, and the gym's owner, a woman named Patricia, who seemed professional and fair. They explained that they'd received the complaint and wanted to investigate it properly. They asked me about my routine, whether anything unusual had happened, whether I'd interacted with anyone in the locker room. I answered all their questions honestly. The whole meeting took maybe 20 minutes. Patricia said that based on her experience with similar situations, she believed the complaint was unfounded and likely stemmed from personal bias. She said that City Fit had a non-discrimination policy and that they took it seriously. She assured me that my membership was not in jeopardy and that I was welcome to continue using all facilities at the gym. I felt relieved. I thought that was going to be the end of it. It wasn't. Update 1. 3 weeks later, I've been back to the gym regularly since that meeting, and everything seemed normal. But then last Friday, I was in the middle of my workout when Derek approached me on the gym floor. He looked agitated and embarrassed again. He asked if I could take a break and come talk to him in his office. In the office, Derek explained that the same member had filed a second complaint. This time, she'd written a detailed letter. I asked to see it, and Derek looked conflicted but ultimately handed me a printed copy. The letter was absolutely insane. She accused me of deliberately flaunting my transgender identity in the locker room, of using the space to make a statement, of making other women uncomfortable with my presence. She said that I had no business being in the women's facilities because I'm not a real woman. She demanded that my membership be revoked and that the gym implement a policy requiring members to use facilities based on biological sex. The letter was written in this rambling, emotional style that made it clear this person was genuinely upset about something, but I couldn't figure out what I'd actually done wrong. According to Derek, this member's name was Linda Thompson, and she'd been a member for about 5 years. I asked Derek what he thought. He sighed and said that Patricia wanted to meet with me again, and that they also wanted to meet separately with Linda to get more details about her complaint. The second meeting with Patricia and Derek happened the next day.
Patricia seemed frustrated this time.
She explained that they'd reviewed the security footage from the locker room to see if there was any basis for the complaint. According to Patricia, I was completely normal in my behavior. I came in, changed into gym clothes, worked out, came back, showered, changed back, and left. Nothing unusual, nothing inappropriate, nothing provocative. Patricia said that based on her review, she believed this complaint was discriminatory in nature and was not based on any actual misconduct. She assured me again that my membership was secure and that the gym would not be taking any action against me. I want to be direct with you, Rachel, Patricia said. This is a bias issue. She has a problem with who you are, not with anything you've done. We don't operate that way here, and we won't be asking you to change anything about how you use our facilities. I felt grateful for Patricia's support, but I was also worried about what Linda might do next. Derek mentioned that they were planning to talk to Linda about the complaint and wanted to see if there were any specific incidents she could point to. Derek seemed skeptical that there would be any actual incidents. Thomas wanted me to file a police report or sue the gym, but I explained that the gym was actually being supportive. They weren't discriminating against me. They were protecting me. That seemed to satisfy him, though he was still angry on my behalf. I took a few days off from the gym, just to decompress from the stress. When I went back, everything seemed fine. I didn't see Linda there, which I was grateful for. Update 2. 2 weeks later. So things escalated in a way I genuinely did not expect. I was at work when I got a call from Derek. He sounded really stressed. He said that Linda had called the gym and demanded to speak to Patricia. Derek had transferred her over, and Patricia had spent about 30 minutes on the phone with Linda. According to Derek, Linda had called back multiple times, each time her complaints becoming more intense. Patricia decided to invite Linda to meet with her in person to discuss the situation. Patricia wanted a witness present, so Derek was there too. According to what Derek told me later, the meeting did not go well. Linda came in angry and aggressive. She demanded that the gym revoke my membership, claiming that my presence was a safety issue for other women. She said that having a man in a dress in the women's locker room was a violation of her rights and the rights of other women members. She insisted that the gym was complicit in some kind of assault or harassment scheme by allowing me to use the women's facilities. Patricia apparently remained very calm and professional. She explained that I am a woman, that I have every right to use the women's facilities, and that the gym's non-discrimination policy means that they will not be revoking my membership based on someone's discomfort with my identity. She said that if Linda was uncomfortable with the gym's policies, Linda was welcome to transfer to a different location or terminate her membership. This seemed to enrage Linda. According to Derek, she started yelling, calling me names, calling Patricia names, demanding to speak to corporate. Patricia remained calm but firm, and she eventually told Linda that if she continued being disruptive, she would be asked to leave the facility. Linda left the gym that day, and no one heard from her for about a week. Then, yesterday morning at around 10 a.m., I was at work when I got a call from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. It was a police officer. He said that someone had filed a complaint against me, alleging that I'd been acting inappropriately in the women's locker room at City Fit Gym and that he needed to ask me some questions. I felt my stomach drop. I told the officer that I hadn't done anything inappropriate and that I was confused about what this was about. The officer said that he needed to investigate the complaint properly and asked if I had time to come down to the station to give a statement. I told him I was at work and asked if this was really necessary. The officer said it was, but that I wasn't under arrest and that I was free to leave at any time. He said it would probably take 30 minutes. I let my boss know I had a personal matter to handle and that I'd be back soon. Thomas insisted on coming with me to the police station, which I was grateful for. When we got to the station, we were brought into a small room with the officer who'd called me. His name was Officer Martinez. He seemed professional, but also seemed skeptical about the whole thing. He explained that a complaint had been filed alleging that I'd been exposing myself in the women's locker room and that I'd been making deliberate attempts to make other women uncomfortable with my presence. He said he needed to ask me some questions about my routine at the gym. I answered all his questions. I explained exactly what I do at the gym, how I behave in the locker room, the fact that I've never been inappropriate in any way. I gave him the names of several people at the gym who could attest to my behavior if needed. I was calm and straightforward in my answers, which I think helped because Officer Martinez seemed to relax a bit. He asked me if there was anyone who had a specific problem with me at the gym. I hesitated, but then I said that someone named Linda Thompson had filed complaints against me, and that based on conversations with the gym management, those complaints seemed to be based on the fact that I'm transgender, not on any actual misconduct. Officer Martinez's expression shifted. He said, "Okay, wait here for a minute," and he left the room. Thomas and I sat there for probably 5 minutes before Officer Martinez came back with another officer. This second officer was older, maybe in his late 50s, with a buzz cut and very distinctive features. When he walked in, I felt this weird spark of recognition, but I couldn't place it. The second officer looked at me, and his eyes widened slightly. He said, "Rachel? Rachel Chun." I was confused, but I said yes. He smiled and said, "Holy shit. I thought I recognized you from the complaint description. It's me, Sergeant Williams. Remember? Army." It clicked. Williams had been a sergeant in my unit when I was in the Army. I'd served for 8 years, from when I was 18 to when I was 26, before I came out and transitioned. Williams had been one of the people in the Army who'd actually been kind to me, who'd treated me decently when I was struggling internally with my identity. I hadn't seen Williams since I left the Army, but we'd stayed in loose contact through Facebook for a while. I remembered that he'd written me a really supportive message when I came out, something about how he was proud of me for being brave and true to myself. Now here he was, as a police officer, apparently investigating this complaint against me. Williams shook his head and said, "This is ridiculous. I'm sorry you're dealing with this." He looked at Officer Martinez and said, "We need to talk about this complaint. This is a frivolous filing, and I want to see the documentation." Williams and Martinez left the room, and Thomas squeezed my hand and whispered, "I think this is about to go in a very different direction." They were gone for about 15 minutes. When they came back, Williams looked even more annoyed than before. He said, "Okay, so here's what happened. Someone, Linda Thompson, called the station and filed a complaint claiming that you were exposing yourself in the women's locker room and deliberately trying to harass other women. She claimed she was a victim of your harassment and wanted to press charges." My heart was pounding. I asked if I was being arrested. Williams said, "No. Let me explain." He went on to explain that he and Martinez had looked into the details of the complaint. Williams had called City Fit Gym Management and spoken to Patricia. Patricia had confirmed that Linda Thompson had made multiple complaints, but that they had reviewed security footage and found no evidence of any misconduct on my part. Patricia had actually been very clear that Linda's complaints appeared to be motivated by discrimination rather than any actual incident. Williams said, "Based on our investigation, this complaint appears to be completely unfounded. There's no evidence of any actual misconduct. Linda Thompson appears to have filed a false report." I wasn't sure what this meant. I asked if I was being charged with anything. Williams said no, but that they were considering whether to press charges against Linda Thompson for filing a false police report. Thomas asked how serious that was. Williams explained that filing a false police report is actually a fairly serious charge. It's a misdemeanor in most cases, but it can result in jail time, fines, and a criminal record. He said that the DA would make the final decision about whether to prosecute, but based on what he'd found, he would be recommending that they do. I felt this strange mix of relief and dread. On one hand, I was relieved that I wasn't being accused of anything. On the other hand, I felt uncomfortable with the idea of Linda being prosecuted. Williams must have sensed this because he said, "Rachel, I know you probably don't want to press this, but she filed a false report accusing you of a crime. That's serious. She could have gotten you arrested. She was trying to ruin your life because of who you are. That's not okay." He was right. I knew he was right, but I still felt weird about it. Williams gave me his personal phone number and told me to call him if Linda tried to contact me or if anything else happened. He made it very clear that he was taking this seriously and that he was going to make sure Linda faced consequences. When Thomas and I left the police station, I felt completely exhausted. Thomas was furious. He kept saying that Linda deserved to be prosecuted, that she'd tried to destroy my reputation and my life, that she needed to face consequences. I called Patricia at the gym as soon as I got back to work. I told her what had happened with the police. She wasn't surprised about the false report charge being considered, but she was concerned about what would happen next. She asked if I wanted to pursue anything against Linda, and I said I wasn't sure yet. That evening, I got an email from a lawyer. She introduced herself as Rebecca Stone, and she said she represented Linda Thompson. She said that Linda wanted to reach out to me to discuss the situation and potentially settle any disputes between us. She asked if I'd be willing to meet with her and Linda to discuss a resolution. Thomas said absolutely not, that I shouldn't meet with anyone without my own lawyer present. I agreed, and I asked around for recommendations. I ended up consulting with a lawyer named James Murphy, who specializes in discrimination and civil rights cases. James reviewed everything and said that what Linda had done was absolutely reckoning. He said that filing a false police report was one thing, but what Linda had done, repeatedly filing complaints based on discrimination, escalating to calling the police with false allegations, could potentially constitute harassment or even defamation. He said that I potentially had a civil claim against Linda. I told him I didn't want to sue anyone. He said that might change if Linda escalated further, but that I should keep all documentation just in. Update 3. 1 week later. Okay, so this is where it gets absolutely wild. I got a call from Officer Williams. He said that Linda Thompson had been formally arrested and charged with filing a false police report. He said the DA had decided to prosecute based on the evidence, and that Linda had been booked and released on her own recognizance pending trial. Williams said, "I wanted you to hear it from me first. She was arrested yesterday. There's going to be a court date set, and you'll likely be asked to testify about what happened. Is that okay?" I said yes, though I was feeling incredibly conflicted about the whole situation. Then, the day after that, I got a letter in the mail. It was from Rebecca Stone, Linda's lawyer. The letter stated that Linda Thompson was filing a civil lawsuit against me for defamation, emotional distress, and harassment. The letter claimed that I had somehow orchestrated the criminal charges against her as revenge for her complaints about my behavior in the gym. It claimed that I had conspired with police to falsely accuse her of filing a false report. The lawsuit was asking for $1 million in damages. When I read that letter, I genuinely felt sick, like physically nauseous. I called James immediately, and I think he was actually surprised by how brazen the lawsuit was. He said that this was going to be a problem, but that it was also potentially a really strong case in my favor because what Linda was claiming was demonstrably false. James said, "She's basically claiming that you conspired with the police to frame her, but she filed a false report. There's documentation of that. There's security footage from the gym. There are statements from gym management. She's going to have an extremely hard time proving your allegations against her are false when her allegations against you were literally proved to be false." I asked him what I should do. He said to just let him handle it and to continue documenting everything. The criminal court date for Linda was set for about 6 weeks out. The civil lawsuit had its own timeline, which James said would probably move more slowly. In the meantime, life got really complicated. Linda apparently started posting about me on Facebook. She created a whole narrative where I was some kind of predatory person who'd falsely had her arrested, and she was claiming that I was a danger to other women. She was tagging the gym in posts, tagging local news stations, tagging advocacy groups. She was essentially trying to get public support for her narrative. Some of her Facebook posts got shared and picked up by various online communities. I started getting hateful comments on my own social media. People were calling me names, threatening me, telling me I didn't belong in women's spaces. Thomas wanted to report all of it, but I was feeling overwhelmed. I just wanted it all to go away. Then things took another turn. One of Linda's Facebook posts was seen by a journalist named Melissa Chen who works for a local news station. Melissa actually reached out to me directly through email. She said she was interested in covering the story, but she wanted to hear my side of things first. She said she'd already tried to reach out to Linda and had been turned down. I was hesitant, but Thomas encouraged me to talk to her. He said that the media attention might actually help my case by showing how unreasonable Linda was being. James was more cautious. He said I should be careful about saying anything that could be used against me, but that a fair news story could be helpful. Melissa and I agreed to meet for coffee. When we met, she was professional and thoughtful. She asked me about my experience at the gym, about the complaints, about the police investigation, about the lawsuit. She was sympathetic, but also critical of Linda's behavior. At the end of the meeting, Melissa said, "I want to tell you something. I did some additional reporting. Linda has a history of making complaints against businesses. Over the past 5 years, she's filed complaints against a yoga studio, a swimming facility, a medical office, and now your gym. All of these complaints involved some element of accusing the business of allowing inappropriate people access to facilities. In the case of the yoga studio and the swimming facility, the complaints were specifically about transgender women using the facilities." I felt cold when she said that. This wasn't just about me. This was a pattern. Melissa's story ran 3 days later. It was fair and balanced, presenting both sides but also noting the pattern of complaints Linda had filed. The story included statements from Patricia at the gym, from Officer Williams, and from me. It also included Linda's perspective, where she claimed she was just concerned about safety and women's rights. The response to the story was huge. The local online community exploded. Most of the comments were supportive of me and critical of Linda. But there was also a segment of people who agreed with Linda's perspective. It became this whole thing. Then something unexpected happened. The yoga studio that Linda had complained about 5 years earlier reached out to James. They wanted to share their documentation of Linda's complaints with me, saying they were relevant to her pattern of behavior. The manager of the yoga studio said they'd been forced to deal with this exact same situation and had ultimately decided to accommodate Linda's complaints to make her go away. They said they regretted that decision now because they felt like they'd enabled her behavior. James said this was actually really valuable. It showed a pattern of Linda making complaints and then backing down when the business didn't immediately capitulate to her demands. Update 4. 6 weeks later, the criminal trial for Linda happened last week.
I was subpoenaed to testify.
When I got to the courthouse, I was nervous. I'd never testified in a criminal case before. Officer Williams found me in the hallway and walked me through what to expect. He was very supportive and made me feel a bit more confident. The trial was relatively brief. The DA presented the evidence of the false complaint, the police report Linda had filed, statements from gym management, security footage from the gym, Officer Martinez's testimony about the investigation, and Williams's testimony about the evidence he found. When it was time for my testimony, I explained what happened from my perspective. The prosecutor asked me about my routine at the gym, my interactions with other members, whether I'd ever done anything inappropriate or aggressive in the locker room. I answered all the questions straightforwardly. Then Linda's lawyer cross-examined me. She tried to make it seem like I was exaggerating or that there was legitimate concern about my presence in the locker room. But her cross-examination actually just highlighted how weak her case was. She kept asking vague questions about my behavior, and I kept giving specific, honest answers. The trial lasted 2 days. The jury deliberated for about 3 hours and came back with a guilty verdict on the charge of filing a false police report. Linda was sentenced to 6 months in jail, suspended for 2 years with probation, plus a fine and community service. She was also ordered to undergo anger management classes and counseling. When the verdict was read, Linda started crying. Her lawyer was already preparing an appeal. After the trial, Officer Williams pulled me aside and said, "You handled that really well. I'm proud of you for standing up for yourself." I thanked him, and he gave me his personal contact information again, just in case I needed anything. Then came the civil case. Update 5. 3 months later, the civil case moved slowly through the discovery process. James was able to get a lot of documentation from Linda's lawyer, and he also got documentation from the yoga studio, the swimming facility, and the medical office that Linda had complained to previously. The evidence painted a clear picture of someone with a pattern of making complaints, and in the case of gender-segregated facilities, a pattern of specifically targeting transgender women, or in one case, a woman who had a masculine appearance and voice. Linda's lawyer tried to argue that the criminal conviction was prejudicial and shouldn't be used in the civil case, but the judge ruled that since the civil case was based on her claims of defamation and harassment, and the defamation was that I'd falsely had her arrested, the criminal conviction was directly relevant. About 3 months into the civil discovery process, Linda's lawyer approached James about settlement negotiations. According to James, Linda's lawyer said that Linda was concerned about the amount of evidence against her and was interested in potentially settling. James came to me with a settlement offer. Linda was offering to pay me $50,000, sign an agreement not to contact me or speak about me publicly, and drop the lawsuit. I thought about it for a long time. I talked to Thomas about it, talked to my therapist about it, even talked to Officer Williams about it. He encouraged me to take it and move on. In the end, I rejected the settlement offer. I wanted Linda to understand that what she'd done was wrong, and I wanted the process to continue so that a judgment would be on record. James went back and told Linda's lawyer that I'd rejected the settlement. Linda's lawyer was apparently shocked and said that Linda wasn't prepared to go to trial. But the case continued anyway. By the time we got close to trial, James had built an incredibly strong case. He had documentation of Linda's pattern of complaints, evidence that her claims against me were false, evidence of the harm I'd suffered as a result of her false accusations, and evidence that Linda's motivation was discrimination based on my gender identity. About 2 weeks before the trial was scheduled to start, Linda's lawyer called James. According to James, Linda wanted to settle again. This time, the offer was higher. $150,000, the same non-contact agreement, dropping a lawsuit, and a letter of apology to me. I still rejected it. I wanted to go to trial. I wanted a judge to officially rule that what Linda had done was wrong. James was a bit concerned about going to trial because there's always uncertainty with juries, but he said he understood where I was coming from and that he thought we had a very strong case. The trial was scheduled to start on a Monday. The Friday before, Linda's lawyer called James again. This time, they offered $300,000, the non-contact agreement, dropping the lawsuit and the letter of apology, plus Linda would need to issue a public retraction of her Facebook posts. I asked James what he thought. He said, "That's a very good settlement. You could walk away with $300,000, a public admission that she was wrong, and legal certainty. Or you could go to trial and risk a jury deciding to award you nothing, though I genuinely don't think that's likely. But I've seen stranger jury verdicts." I thought about it over the weekend. I talked to Thomas. He said it was my decision, but that he thought $300,000 was more than fair and that the public retraction would be important for clearing my name. I called James on Monday morning, right before the trial was supposed to start, and I told him I'd accept the settlement. Update 6, final update, 2 months later. So the settlement was finalized about a month ago. Linda paid me $300,000, which is a substantial amount of money. We used some of it to pay James's legal fees, but there's a good chunk left over that I'm using to build a nice safety net and save for future plans with Thomas. Linda issued a public retraction of her Facebook posts. Her lawyer had her write a statement saying that her accusations against me were unfounded and that she regretted making them. It wasn't a full apology, but it was something. The non-contact agreement means Linda can't contact me, can't post about me on social media, can't go to City Fit Gym while I'm there. They were willing to work out a schedule, and I can't talk about me publicly in any way. If she violates any of these terms, I can pursue additional legal action. I stayed at City Fit Gym. Patricia made sure that I was still comfortable there, and she actually implemented some additional sensitivity training for staff about discrimination and diversity. She also put up some posters about the gym's non-discrimination policy, which I appreciated. I've kept in touch with Officer Williams. He actually invited me and Thomas to have dinner with him and his wife. His wife is really cool, and we ended up having a great night talking about life and how much has changed since I was in the Army. I ran into Derek, the gym manager, a few weeks ago and thanked him again for handling the situation professionally. He said he was just doing his job, but I told him that not all businesses would have handled it the way City Fit did. The public attention from the news story and the trial was initially overwhelming, but it actually ended up being helpful. I got contacted by several organizations that work on transgender rights and discrimination issues. They asked me to speak about my experience, and I ended up giving a talk at a local community center about navigating discrimination and knowing your rights. That talk led to other opportunities. I was interviewed by a podcast about discrimination in public spaces. I contributed to an article in a local magazine about transgender experiences in everyday life. I became a local voice on this issue in a way I never expected. Thomas and I got engaged about a month ago. We're planning a small wedding for next fall, and surprisingly, we're going to have Officer Williams and his wife there. He became a good friend to both of us throughout this whole ordeal. As for Linda, I've heard through the grapevine that she's dealing with the fallout of the public retraction and the settlement. I've heard that some of her friends have distanced themselves from her and that she's been dealing with some online criticism herself. Part of me feels bad about that, but most of me recognizes that she brought all of this on herself. Looking back on everything, I don't regret standing up for myself. I don't regret going to trial or rejecting the earlier settlement offers. Linda's behavior was discriminatory and harmful, and I think it was important to make that clear through the legal system. But I also recognize that this whole situation took an emotional toll on me. There were nights where I questioned myself, where I wondered if I was overreacting, where I felt guilty about the legal consequences Linda faced. My therapist helped me work through a lot of that, and eventually I came to understand that I wasn't responsible for Linda's choices. She chose to make false accusations. She chose to escalate things with the police. She chose to sue me. I just responded to those choices by protecting myself and my reputation. Would I do things differently if I could go back in time? Honestly, I don't think so. The only thing I might have done differently is accept one of the earlier settlement offers, but then I wouldn't have had the public clarity and vindication that the trial provided. If anyone reading this is dealing with discrimination or false accusations, I would say, document everything. Find a good lawyer. Believe in yourself. And don't let other people's fear or prejudice define your life. You have the right to exist in the world as your authentic self, and anyone who has a problem with that is their problem to deal with, not yours. Also, be nice to people who support you through hard times. Like Officer Williams, He didn't have to care about my case or take it seriously, but he did. And that made all the difference. That's everything. I'm done with this chapter of my life, and I'm excited to move forward with my engagement, my career, and my life with Thomas. Thanks to everyone who was supportive throughout this whole ordeal.